I don't think people in academia are nearly as picky as they should be. I feel like, especially as prospective PhD student, there's just so much fear about not getting into a program, and you're constantly thinking, how can I get in? How can I get in? But not really thinking about, is this the right school for you? Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I am Georga-Kay. I am a second year PhD student at Brown University, and in today's video is an exciting one because someone actually requested this video topic, which is how to choose the right PhD program for you. And so I'm gonna share how I feel like I picked the best PhD program for me out of from the pre-application process of vetting the schools to post-application of what you do when you get in to make the right choice if you do have multiple options. So I'm gonna be going through everything that I did so that I can end up at a school with a really good stipend, a livable stipend, school in a city that I love, and a school where I have good housing and good mentorship. So all of those things I'll be sharing how you too can find the school that's right for you, the right PhD program that will help you thrive. And I don't think people in academia are nearly as picky as they should be. I feel like, especially as prospective PhD student, there's just so much fear about not getting into a program, and you're constantly thinking, how can I get in? How can I get in? But not really thinking about, is this the right school for you? Is this the school that's gonna give you the money that you need to survive? Is this a school where the mentorship is going to be good, people are going to be communicative, they're going to be open to feedback and working with you? Is that a school where you even want to live in that location? Like, do you want to live there for the next 5 years? And I think because of that fear of not getting in, because of sort of like that scarcity mindset that we get as PhD students or prospective PhD students of like, oh wait, am I not going to be paid enough? I need to take any offer that I can get if I can do anything. And so I want to discourage that from the get-go and just say, have an open, abundant mind. And I would say, come in with your non-negotiables. Don't let grad school drag you this way or that way. How much money is too little money for you to take for a PhD program? What advising is like, nope, that's not gonna work for me? What location is like, you could not pay me to go there? Like, you need to know these things if you're gonna be applying to a PhD program. So first I want to talk about the pre-application process. So this is when you're even looking at schools to select. You're gonna have to be asking yourself some really hard questions. I highly recommend starting at this point and deciding, what do you truly want from a PhD program? Don't go into thinking, okay, well, kind of sorta, I'm fine with if I get $20,000 for an offer, I'm fine if I just want to get in. I get that fear so much of I just want to get in, I just want to go somewhere. If you really love the topic and you're like, I'm doing this for love, not money, I would say you can do it for love because I truly love what I study, but at the same time, you need to be taken care of in every way possible for you to be a good researcher. You need to live somewhere that you love and that you feel is safe. You need to be supported by your department. You need to have the money to be able to live and not be worrying about other things when you're supposed to be worrying about research. And so in the pre-application process, I need you to ask yourself a few questions, including what is the lowest amount that you can live on? And I would highly say, think about this holistically. Think about looking at, there's a specific PhD stipend list that I'll link in the description that you can look at the cost of living. So don't just think about, okay, well, I need 35K because that's about high average for PhD students. No, if you're gonna be living in New York, that's not gonna cut it. If you're gonna be living in San Francisco, that's not gonna cut it. You need to think about the cost of living, where you're gonna be living, and overall how that's gonna work. You also need to be thinking about the location. Where can you actually live? Do you want to be close to family? Do you want to stick in a specific city? You don't want to go outside of that city? Do you want to live in the Northeast? Do you want to live on the West Coast? You need to consider location as well. Location is one of those big factors, and I think it's very easy to be okay, but there's a prestigious school on the other side of the country that I don't actually want to live in. And I would say in that case, I would still recommend not applying, because if you do get in and then you go, you're gonna be miserable because you know in your heart of hearts that you want to live close to family, or you don't want to live close to family. You want the opposite. You want to go on an adventure and do something else. Really stick to applying to the schools that align with your top 5 categories, and you can decide what those categories are. For a lot of people, it's location, it's stipend. You can think about things like advising style. Do you have multiple advisors that you can work with? Are you excited about the type of advisors that you can work with? What about the school? Is the school highly ranked? That's something to consider. I know a lot of people like to be like, oh no, like you don't need to consider ranking, but let's be honest, we do consider ranking. Everyone does. Like, you want to get into a school that is well known, that has a strong alumni status, all of those things, and it's totally fine to consider ranking. Of course, I would personally say to consider ranking like within the mixture of everything else, including location, stipend, and all of that other good stuff, mentorship style. Some questions that I think that PhD students often don't think about is cost of housing. Do you want guaranteed housing? Is housing a big deal to you? Are you fine living with roommates? You don't mind having another person, or maybe you're coming with a partner and you know, like, okay, we can afford it together or whatever. But housing is often a very contentious one, and especially if you're like really excited about a school but that it's in a big city or it's in a really rural area where you don't have access to housing, that's something I would consider up front when you're doing your list, is looking at that option. Like, what are their graduate housing options? What are housing? Look at Zillow in the area. Like, is it looking crazy? Can you afford something on the stipend that they currently have? Another question to consider is, are you fine taking on additional side hustles? Maybe you're like, this is the lab that I want to work in, and this is the school that I want to go to, but they don't pay enough for me to go out to lunch with my friends or for me to take a trip, and I really want to do that. And you're like, okay, well, maybe I'll do a little bit of dog sitting, or maybe I'll do something that's more research related. I'll get an extra RA ship. Like, are you fine with doing extra hours? What is your current lifestyle? If you have kids, that might be different. If you have caregiving responsibilities, that might be different. But think about, okay, well, if this, like in the case that the stipend is enough but it covers all my other things, then maybe I'm willing to take on additional income. Even though I will say a lot of programs don't recommend or they have rules against taking on additional income, but the reality of a lot of PhD programs is that if you truly cannot make it work financially, you're just gonna have to take on additional income and kind of just like. Another thing that I think people don't consider when they're doing research in the pre-application process is department culture. And department culture is going to actually be influenced by a lot of things, including how big the department is, city that's more spread out, is in a like more tightly, physically tight location. All of that will influence the department culture. I would say when I was looking at schools, I really wanted a close-knit department. I wanted a department that hosted dinners, that had more social events for people in the department. Some people don't want that. They don't want to be working with you all day and also hanging out with you after, and so that's something that's totally fine. But think about that. Do you want more of a hands-off experience with the department where I can come in, do the work that I love and do the work that I want to do and then leave? Or do you want somewhere where it's like, you know, fostering more community? I feel like because I was coming in my early 20s and I was like, I pretty much, this is going to be my life. I need friends here, so I want a department that's more close-knit, that's actually going to care about its students and make a lot of effort. So yeah, so there's just a few questions that I would consider in the pre-application phase. And of course, you won't be able to answer all of these strictly from your school's website, the schools that you're looking at. In this phase, you really need to be reaching out to professors and students. And I will say it's very nerve-wracking. I feel for that. I cold emailed so many people. I actually have a blog post on the email templates that I use. If anyone's interested, it'll be linked down below. But cold email people and try to get a feel for these questions that can't really be answered, because a PhD program is a long-term commitment. Like, it's not the same as really going to get an undergrad degree, because oftentimes it's a year or two longer. And then another thing is, at the age that you're coming into a PhD program, you're really developing your career. You might be staying in that city long term. You might be building a family, building your life. And so you really want to make sure you're making a decision as if you're choosing to get a job somewhere, basically. So you want to make sure that you can answer those questions about department culture, about the pay, about the benefits. And if you can't find that information online, then the best way to do that is to just reach out to students and be like, hey, I have a few questions. I would say reach out to students about obviously like the social things and like pay, how can you live, all of those things. And then if you have questions about, okay, trying to get a vibe for the department culture, I would say if you have specific questions about what type of students professors work with, what opportunities, you can direct that either to like a DGA, which is like a director of graduate advising or director of graduate studies, or you can direct that to specific professors. But just be very careful about when you're applying, when you're emailing professors with questions that really can't be answered by anyone else. Like, you don't want to be asking like a very basic question, because professors are busy and you want to make a good first impression. So just make sure that you're asking specific questions that get to the heart of the things that matter to you. Now, for a little word of advice of things that I would personally look out for when I'm applying for schools that you might not think of. Or number one being, when you're applying for schools, look if they have a graduate student union. Like, a lot of people, when you're coming in, you don't really think about that. You're just excited excited about the work, you're excited about the school, whatever it might be. But a graduate student union will literally be the biggest indicator of your quality of life out of school. And obviously you can apply to schools that don't have a graduate union, but I will say if you're looking at a school and it does, like, I would give it some extra points on your list, because graduate student unions, obviously you have bargaining power, you're gonna have higher stipends, you're gonna have more protections in place. And you might be thinking, I don't need protections, I don't need an extra stipend, I have family, da da da. I would still highly consider it, because a graduate student union is making sure that graduate students are taken care of holistically. And so you might not need the specific protections that they might offer, but other students might, and that might make your experience much more tolerable if everyone isn't bitchy and thinking about, oh my god, I don't have enough funding, I don't have this, I don't have that. Like, everyone's taken care of, makes for a much more relaxing and welcoming environment. The second thing to consider is, as I said before, I highly recommend reaching out to people, cold emailing people, and I would say take note of people who respond. Like, if you reach out to the DGA and no one responds for weeks, or they just never respond, like, yeah, you can still apply, but I would take that as a sign. Like, you can see, I think oftentimes people, when they start recruiting, then you start getting all the nice emails, you start like, okay, you got in, now we care about you. But you really want to make sure that you're going to a school that genuinely cares about students, that cares about researchers. And so I would say if you're emailing professors and you just never ever get a response back, that could be a bad sign that they're just not available, or they're overextended. Or same for the director, the director of graduate school, or even students within the program. If everyone is being super non-communicative and you're just like, okay, well, yeah, technically I'm not a student here, but I do have questions and no one's answering them, then I would say that's a bad sign, and maybe you want to reconsider that school, especially if you end up getting into that school that if you apply there. Really consider like the vibe that you get when you're communicating with people from that school during the application process, whether that be pre-application or post-application. How available are people? How are they in terms of are they welcoming you? Are they actually taking you seriously? Like, all of those things matter, and I would pay attention to that while you're applying. And of course, I would say look at the livability of that area. If all the graduate students that you're talking to are saying that they're struggling, that they can't, like, they have to be worrying about housing and all those things, I would say it's not worth it. Like, it's not worth it. It could be the best school, it could be the best program, best professors, but if you're going to be struggling semester to semester to cover your basic expenses or to find housing, then I would just, like, honestly not do it, or like put that at the bottom of your list, or get some sort of guarantee from the department that they will guarantee housing, or they will, you know, match you with someone who you can get housing or get advice on housing, all of those things. Then the last piece of advice is just to make sure you have an abundance of faculty to work with. I definitely fell into this trap. One of my schools that I applied to, I was like, I love this one professor. She has done the work. I love her books. She's just amazing. She's a rock star. She's a scholar that I want to work with. And when I was looking at the department, I'm like, there's no one else in here that I even care to work with. Like, the work doesn't seem interesting to me, or they don't have the same, like, career goal. Like, they're not, like, in the same field in terms of, like, what they want to do, like, career-wise. They just want to be strictly academic, and I want more someone who's interested in public history and digital history. And so, I would say, like, make sure you're applying to schools where you can say, okay, 3 or 4 people in this department, I could work with any of these people. Sometimes it is really difficult. Sometimes you might just have 2 people in an apartment that you're like, I really could work with these people, and then everyone else is kind of like, eh. But you at least want to make sure you don't just have one person that you're like, this is the only person I'm interested in working with. Everyone else is just sort of here, like, as a standby, because things happen. Professors need to go away. Professors need to take time off, and you just never know. Professors move schools. Like, you just never know what's going to happen. And so you want to make sure that you're thinking about all the things, and if that professor can't work, who else can you work with? Okay, and so once you've gone through the pre-application process, you've answered the questions about all the things in terms of livability, department culture, the area you want to live in, and the community, all of those things, I would say when you're making a list, I actually have some application trackers that do this very well. I'll link them below. You want to make sure you're putting that stuff on there. When you're making a spreadsheet, put those qualifications on there, and make sure that you're matching your list. So you can see, like, okay, this school has 4 out of the 5 top things that I want in a school. So you know that school is ranked high. And I would say rank your schools. Like, when you're starting the pre-application process, rank them and say these schools 1, 2, 3, because these schools have the 5 out of 5 things, and it doesn't obviously have to be 5. You might just have 3 things that are really important to you, but these schools have those 3 things. And so make sure you know what are your non-negotiables and what those things are, those things that are really important to you. Put them on your application tracker and track the schools by those things, and make sure you're putting in, okay, well, I even put an example on screen, but it matches these 3 things. And so yeah, just make sure you do that. Make sure you're ranking them, because now as we get into the post application phase, we'll start to look at, okay, well, we already know all of these things. We know, we've spoken to students, we know that this school matches the stipend that we want, this school has the community that we want, all of those things. So once you start getting your decisions, it might be that you get 1 decision back and you already know, okay, well, it has 2 to 3 things out of my list. Am I okay with that? Or it has 3 things on my list out of 5, or whatever, like whatever it might be, you already know because you have that on a list. And so you can start to look, okay, really reading your application letter. So once you get in, it's like, okay, you have a couple options. Read your application letter. Like, this is treat it as if you were accepting a job offer. I don't know why more people don't do this. I think this is the best way to do it. I know it's like, it's supposed to be icky to be like, I'm not gonna be super strategic, I want to do it for the love of it. But no, you're not gonna benefit from that. So make sure you're getting your thing back. And sometimes I will say PhD programs, they can be very generic acceptances, where it's like, okay, well, you get this much funding, and this, we're accepting you into this program, but nothing else. But there's so many other details that you want to make sure you're clear on before you accept an offer. So once you get your offer, you have to think about how many years are you funded in total, and in what funding sources are you getting them. So are you funded for 2 years and then you're screwed for the rest of the time, or are you kind of like guaranteed funding for this time, they're like, we think we can get you funding for another time? Or is it like you're funded all throughout? Like, the program usually takes 6 years to complete, but we're giving you that 6 years. So you want to know how long is that program and how many years of funding have they given you, and in what form. Is it a fellowship? Is it an RA-ship? Is it a TA-ship? And so fellowships often don't come with a obligation to do anything outside of coursework. So those are like the best years, because you get to do research, you get to focus on being a student. And then TA-ships means that you might be helping to teach classes. The amount of classes depends, and sometimes you get right out of the bat, you have a TA-ship, which honestly sounds really overwhelming. Sometimes you have an RA-ship, where you'd be doing a little bit of research with professor during the semester as you're doing coursework, or as you're doing your writing. So make sure you know in what form and for how many years, and if that is not clear, reach out to your director of graduate school and say, hey, can we sit together and talk about these things, about how funding works? And you want to talk to students as well. Obviously, students can tell you different funding sources that you might not know about. Okay, well, yeah, you have these years of fellowship, you can actually get an extra year of fellowship through this department, through this thing. And so make sure you can think about other funding sources as well. Even if you're well funded and you feel like, okay, I'm good, I would still talk to students and like, okay, well, where's the other pots of money? How do people get funded for research travel? How do people get funded for conference travel? That's another thing that's often not included. And sometimes it's like you're on your own, but okay, what are the sources? Like, you really have the most leverage in the post-application phase of your application. So make sure you're taking your time. Even if you got 1 acceptance and you're like, this seems good, I'm gonna take this. Before you even take that, sit and talk to people in the department who are supposed to be responsible for recruiting, and make sure that they know that these are my questions. How will I be funded for my conferences? How many conferences am I expected to go to? What are my unofficial obligations as a student, and who's paying for these? Because all of these things come with financial obligations. If you're going to be traveling for research or traveling for conferences, who's paying for that? And then another thing you need to think about is, how many months of the year are you funded? Are you funded just during the school year, or are you funded during the summer as well? Summer funding is such a big thing. Like, summer funding is a big thing because a lot of schools fund you through the school year and leave you for dry in the summer. And so if you happen to be in that situation, I would say negotiate for summer funding. I'm going to go into briefly about negotiations, but summer funding is one of those things where it's like, okay, well, you have a little bit of leverage when you're coming in, and if you know, okay, this is the 9-month thing is not going to work for me, start thinking about how letting them know, okay, well, I'm really excited about this offer, but I want to know, how am I going to take care of my summers? They can guarantee you an RA-ship, they can put something in writing, like, make sure that you're thinking about things like that. So yeah, so once you've gone through and you've talked to people about the questions that you have, if things are not clarified in your letter, then you can start to think, okay, questions have been answered, but maybe some of those answers are not up to par. As I said, it might be that you have to pay for your conference travel and research travel. It might be that you have to pay for your summers on your own, or it might be that you have no options for housing. Those things are things you can negotiate. Like sometimes schools will be really flexible on a stipend, but they might be more flexible on guarantee you a slot in graduate student housing. They might be more flexible on giving you special preferences for conference travel, or telling you where you can get conference money. So you want to make sure you're sitting down and asking these things. I personally would say negotiating strategy is to talk to someone first. Don't come out of the woodworks and be like, I need X, blah, blah, blah. Like, you want to make sure you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to sit down. These are my questions. I just have questions about these things that are not clarified. And then once that is done and you're like, okay, we've spoken about it, then you can say, hey, I'm just following up with an email. We spoke about so-and-so, and I've been thinking through, and I'm really excited about the school, but I'm concerned about my ability to support myself for the summers, and it's something that could impact my decision. Is there something that the department can do? Is there something that can be done through the graduate school? And so I would say, like, you know, come in with the thing that you want the most. That's like the biggest thing, because sometimes there are a few small things where it's like, okay, they don't have the travel funding, they don't have summer funding, but if summer funding is a thing that's like, I need that summer funding, then come in with that and say, hey, this is a thing that's like could potentially make me not accept this offer. And so just let whoever is like the main person for the graduate recruiting, whether that be the director of graduate school or a specific department head, then just let them know that that's what you're concerned about, that's impacting your decision. Say, hey, what can be done about this? And that's what negotiating is. Like, it isn't like, I need this thing, I will decline if I don't get this thing, but this is concerning to me. This is not the expectation that I wanted when I was coming into it. How can we meet in the middle? And so let them come back. They might be like, oh, we actually can help you with this. We can put you in touch with someone who can get you the housing. We can put you in touch with someone who can get you an RA ship for the summer, so that you're taken care of in the summer. And so if they come back, they might have good news. More often than not, they can give you some of the things that you are asking for. Sometimes they might be like, hey, we would love for you to come, but we just don't have the funding for this thing. And in that case, you can say, well, since this is something that's, you know, a big deal to me that I'm not getting, is there like another thing that you can follow up with your second order of concerns? You're like, well, this other thing, is this more smaller concern that would make me feel a little bit more comfortable, that could be met. And so yeah, you just want to take it like that, be respectful, be very open, and just be like, these are the things that are really important to me as a student that will make or break my experience. And so once you're like, okay, you're in the weeds, you're negotiating, it is possible to negotiate, it is possible to get these things, especially if you're clear about what will impact your graduate student experience, then of course your decision will be made. You'll be like, okay, I got the things that I needed, I did not get the things that I asked for, and are you okay with that? Are you okay with 5 years with the offer that they've given you? Of course, that offer might change over time in terms of like, they might increase their stipends, or they might increase more protections, but you have to really consider it from the offer that you're currently getting, because that's like the standard that you're coming into. So if it's already a horrible deal, then it's not going to get much better than that. If it's already a great deal, then you're like already set for the rest of the time. So these are just some things that I would consider when you're applying for grad school that I think can make you a happy, successful graduate student, because it is hard out here for PhD students, especially all over the country, seeing what's happening with a lot of students on strike, students trying to unionize, because we really have to be proactive in advocating for ourselves. And so I highly recommend that you advocate for yourself throughout this process. Be diligent, be picky, and you can get in, you will get into the school that you're meant to go to for that process. And so let me know if you have any questions. I'll be down there answering questions in the comments, and I'll see you guys in my next video.